This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
I'm kind of homesick for a country to which I've never been before. No sad goodbyes will there be spoken, for time won't matter anymore. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land.
Here you see the beautiful structure known as Ashland. This is not the original building, but this is where Henry Clay would have lived. Henry Clay was the moderator in 1843 between Alexander Campbell and Nathan L. Rice. In that debate, they discussed Calvinism. John B. Bowman lived here for a while. Bowman was regent of the Kentucky University, one of the schools in the Restoration movement. Leaving Ashland, we come to the Bethel Presbyterian Church and Cemetery. Now, this is not the original meeting house. There's been about 2 to 3 others, one of them at least across the road. It was here that Rice Haggard, Barton Stone, and others came to discuss the Bible. You see, some of the men wanted a creed because they thought the Bible was too broad. They even wrote papers on it to see what needed to be done and discussed it. Finally, they came to the conclusion they ought to go by the Bible and the Bible only. It was here that Rice Haggard said we ought to be known as Christians and Christians only. You can see some of the unusual graves here, built above ground. You don't see these just anywhere. All right, we're leaving the old Bethel Church and Cemetery, and we're on our way to Georgetown. We're in Georgetown, Kentucky, and Georgetown, Kentucky is rich in Restoration history. Joining us, a good historian for this area, Ann Bevins. Ann Barton Stone came here and established a congregation. We'd like for you to tell us about that.
Well, in 1816, when Barton Stone came to Georgetown to serve as principal of Rittenhouse Academy, which was a classical school, there was located on this side a log meeting house called the Republican Meeting House. Now, various denominations were given the privilege of using the meeting house, but it had ceased to be used pretty much by the time that Barton Stone came to Georgetown. So in 1816, he preached in the meeting house, and in 1819, the family of Elijah Craig, the founder of Georgetown, deeded to the Christian church the lot where the ecumenical meeting house was located, and said in that deed that should it cease to be used by the Christian churches, that it would become available to some other church. That was in 1819, the same year that Barton Stone bought his farm east of Georgetown. He served as the minister of the Georgetown Church until 1834, when he moved to Jacksonville, Illinois. There were various reasons given for Stone moving to Illinois. One, that he saw a fertile mission field in Illinois, much as he had seen in Kentucky when he came to Kentucky in the 1790s. Also, that he was so opposed to slavery that he believed that since his wife had inherited slaves from her family, that they would become free once they got into Illinois. those various reasons caused Stone to relocate. But during the years that he was minister of the Georgetown Church, he also led in the establishment of Christian churches all over the Mid-American region, and was very, very active in preaching and organizing churches, in training young people to enter the ministry, and also in publishing the Christian Messenger, which became the medium by which the Christian churches were spread throughout the region. So that gives this congregation a great point of pride in having been organized by Barton Stone, and then having him serve as the minister over this long period of time when he did much of his greatest work.
We are behind the First Christian Church here in Georgetown, and right behind us is where Bacon College used to be. We're going to ask Ann if she'll tell us about Bacon College.
Bacon College happened in Georgetown as a direct result of a conflict between the Kentucky Baptists and the Christian churches, which in 1831 and 1832 had encouraged various congregations of those two faiths in various communities to merge. In Georgetown, which was considered to be the central point of the Christian churches due to the fact that Barton Stone between 1816 and 1834 had lived in Georgetown both as a teacher at Rittenhouse Academy and as the preaching elder, the leading minister of the Christian church. Those two movements, with the merger that took place in 1831 in Georgetown and 1832 in Lexington, or at least began to merge at that time, had among the charter members of the Georgetown Combined Congregation Thornton Fitzhugh Johnson. Thornton Fitzhugh Johnson in 1829 was the first professor hired by Georgetown College, which had been established by the people of Georgetown along with the Kentucky Baptist Education Society. Johnson was more or less the heart and soul of Georgetown College at that time, because the program that he pioneered was a civil engineering program. And the civil engineering in the early 1830s in Kentucky was a major force because many roads were being built, canals were being built. There was a lot of interest in building using public money to build such works, and it would require a large number of civil engineers. In the late 1830s, when there was an economic collapse in the United States, the program more or less ceased to be as inviting as it had been. But in 1836, when Thornton Johnson, who was a member of the Christian church, was a target of the Kentucky Baptists, that his leadership, because he was a member of the Christian church, was suspect, that he would be dismissed from the faculty of Georgetown College. Johnson immediately sought support from the Christian churches. He enlisted Walter Scott to come to Georgetown to serve as the first president of the college that he named Bacon College in honor of Francis Bacon, the father of scientific reasoning. Bacon College was for several years, for 3 years to be exact, located in a building that stood behind the present First Christian Church of Georgetown, a large double brick building, and it was owned by Henry Johnson, who was a member of the larger Johnson family, a cousin of Fitzhugh Johnson, a brother of Richard M. Johnson, who was Vice President of the United States, and a brother of John T. Johnson, one of the early ministers of the Christian Church. Bacon College, during its first couple of years, attracted a very large enrollment, and then with the economic collapse that followed 1837, the enrollment began to decline. Plus, there was a spirit in Georgetown that Alexander Campbell decried as being the heart of Baptist emotion, and he said that it made it that spirit made it inhospitable for Bacon College to continue in Georgetown, and in 1839 Bacon College relocated in Harrodsburg at Graham Springs. So it's largely a story of picking up the pieces of the civil engineering program and establishing a new college under the auspices of the Christian churches. The first Christian church supported college in the United States, actually predating Bethany College. A very important college that today has continuity at the University of Kentucky and in the Lexington Theological Seminary and in Transylvania University in Lexington. So it was an important hallmark in the history of Kentucky education.
And when Barton Stone was here, they didn't have a baptistry. Where'd they baptize the people?
Well, the people of First Christian Church, very solemnly singing a hymn, would walk about a block to the west to the Big Spring Branch. At one time, this spring branch was so deep, we're in a drought at this photographing, but it was so deep that it was said that you could swim a horse across. During the baptism service, the congregation would continue to sing, and the various candidates for baptism would receive their immersion here. The baptism steps have been reconstructed in recent years, but do stand on the exact spot and follow the very same formation as the older steps.
How far would you say we're from the church building?
We're about a city block away from the Christian church.
Okay, was Barton Stone and his group the only group that baptized here?
All people, all Christian people who baptized by immersion, who lived in Georgetown, used the Big Spring for their baptisms for a number of years.
And could you tell us a little bit about the Rittenhouse Academy?
Well, Rittenhouse Academy had its beginnings in 1787 when Elijah Craig, the founder of Georgetown, advertised in the Kentucky Gazette that he was opening the first of 1788 on the Royal Spring in Georgetown, a log academy where 40 scholars could study Latin, Greek, and the sciences. The school continued to stand on what is known as Old Town Lot number 11 on South Broadway until 1816, when it was relocated on the Georgetown College, on the present Georgetown College campus. It was also in 1816 that Barton Stone was engaged to become principal of Rittenhouse Academy. Rittenhouse Academy continued to exist, probably in decreasing fashion, until 1829, when Georgetown College was established and the assets of Rittenhouse were absorbed into Georgetown College.
We're just east of Georgetown, here at the home of Barton Stone. And tell us about Barton Stone's life and the home place here at that time.
In 1819, the year that the Georgetown Christian Church received title to its property, Barton Stone received the deed to the farm of Israel Grant. On that farm was a log house in which the Grant family had lived. Barton Stone and his family moved into the log house, which continues today, somewhat changed, but still the same house. Many of the interior features are still in place.
Oh, this is real interesting. Why don't we go in and look in the house?
Okay.
How do you do? I'm Al Drake.
Hey, we want to thank you and your wife, Catherine, for allowing us to come into the home and look around.
Well, very pleased to have you come.
Thank you much.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you again. Come on in. We inherited the house from our parents in 1990-91 when they passed away, and we just a drafty old farmhouse, and we were inclined to kind of fix it up because we kind of wanted to use it. So in the process of fixing it up, we discovered that we had walnut walls here underneath of some what we call hog hair plaster. The original part of the house, as I understand it, is these 2 rooms here on the on the ground floor, 2 rooms in the basement that are dirt, and 2 upstairs, and then a full attic. So it's a very large original dwelling built in 1786, 87, I believe, and logs right out of the wilderness, white ash. And you can see some of these lines that were left when we took the slats off, and of course there are lots of holes in the wall where the nails were put into it. This is an original window here, one of the few original windows. I believe in about 1890 they had a renovation and they lengthened the windows in the front. So this is the size of an original window, which we discovered. It was covered up when we renovated, so we exposed it and made a bookcase out of it. Now the reason it's not a window, there's an addition on the back of the house that was added, I'd guess sometimes in the mid-1800s. When we exposed these logs here, I discovered at about gun sight height openings that could very easily have been for putting a rifle through to protect from the Indians and the bears or whatever have you. Now this is the only room that we thoroughly renovated. We took it all the way back to the walls. The plaster was really falling off the walls rather badly.
Okay. Was the fireplace here when Barton was here?
Yes, the fireplace was here, but at that time it was made of stone. And as you can see from the bookcase that we put in on the side, the fireplace was a good deal wider when it was made of stone than when it was made of brick. Now this window is one of the few remaining original windows that's still functional. It is, when we renovated, we discovered how it was put together, and we found the pegs that held it together. So it's exactly as it was when it was originally built.
Okay. Is there any place we can go to see some of the original structure logs?
Yes, during our renovation over here, first of all, we put this door in to have access here. This was partially the stairways going to the attic. But down here, where I put in an extra set of stairs, I have exposed logs. As you can see from these old logs and the putty that's in between them, they use rocks and putty to make it solid, and the workmanship on the mortar, on the joist, as they put them into the logs, there were no iron at all, no nails in this building, and they were able to fit those in and create the flooring for the second floor room there, and were able to get them a very excellent situation. Now these are the logs that we cut out to put in the opening for the new stairway. So after we got it renovated, I said, well, we ought to fix it up so we could show it to people. So this is what we did.
And you've been very gracious to us.
Well, I appreciate you coming out.
It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
The spring house is east of Stone's house, the Stone Spring House that would date to the Israel Grant period. And behind the house is a log stable, which we know that Barton Stone used probably to stable the horses that he used for his missionary journeys.
We're now going to leave the home of Barton Warren Stone and look at some other homes where some men lived who were involved in the restoration movement. The first one we come to is D.S. Burnett. D.S. Burnett was a man that was very instrumental in bringing about the Missionary Society. From the home of D.S. Burnett, we come to John T. Johnson's home. John T. Johnson was a man that had a lot of influence in the Restoration movement. He worked very closely with men like Barton W. Stone. He helped to co-edit the Christian Messenger. His brother was Vice President of the United States of America. He helped to promote unity between the Stone and the Campbell movements. Here are a series of homes in which many of the professors of the various colleges lived. Among those, Thornton Johnson, also Moses Ferris. As we leave these buildings and look, we see a piece of property where John Raccoon Smith used to live. Here you see a home, but the home was not there. But that is the property where John Raccoon Smith lived when he lived in Georgetown.
Be still, my soul.
Now, from a series of homes, we want to go to the Georgetown Cemetery, and especially do we want to look for the gravesite of John Allen Gano. Gano was one of the students of Barton W. Stone. What we found to be amazing in this cemetery was some of the things written on some of the markers, which made all of us believe they'd come to a knowledge of the truth. In this area right here, there's a lot of Ganos buried. And on the markers, you'll read things like, baptized for the remission of sins, baptized into Christ. They had come to understand the gospel plan of salvation. And they wanted everybody to know that they were children of God and understood what it took to be a faithful member of the body of Christ. Here we see the Newtontown Christian Church, established by John Allen Gano. Gano was very zealous in his efforts to spread the gospel of Christ. He even went down into Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and established congregations in that area. As we travel out the road just a little bit further, we see the Oxford Christian Church, established in 1847. Instrumental in this work were John Allen Gano and John Raccoon Smith. All right, we leave the Oxford Christian Church and we come to the mansion of John Allen Gano. And you can see that this was a man of means. John Allen Gano was a man who wanted to know the truth. He went and stayed for a while with Barton W. Stone so that he could learn all that he possibly could about the Word of God. Once he learned the truth, and there's no doubt about it, this man learned the truth, he with great zeal went forth throughout this area as well as other areas in trying to proclaim the truth that he had learned. Now we're going to travel from the mansion of John Allen Gano, and we want to talk about the schools a little bit. We want to go to Old Morrison, where the College of the Bible was located. Paul Vaughn joins us again, and he tells us some interesting things about the colleges in our brotherhood. Paul, we're at the Lexington Theological Seminary. How does this fit into the Restoration movement?
Well, it has a great deal of history as far as fitting into the Restoration movement and our brotherhood. But we have to backdate it a little bit. We're at the Lexington Theological Seminary in Lexington, Kentucky, just across the road from the University of Kentucky, and the Lexington Theological Seminary, the University of Kentucky, and Transylvania University. All three of these has a relation to our brotherhood. And if we go back to Georgetown, Kentucky in 1836, and it was at this time that the brethren in that area started Bacon College. It was the first college in the brotherhood in this country. And from 1836 to 1839, the college was in Georgetown. Now, the first president was Walter Scott, the second was D.S. Burnett. Now, while Walter Scott was president, that the student body was growing, and it was mainly because of Richard Johnson, who came out of the Baptist Church and the Baptist College there in Georgetown, and he drew a lot of students with him, and the school was growing greatly. And then there was a bad economic turn, and then the student body started to go down, and the school was moved from there to Harrodsburg, Kentucky, which is about 20 to 30 miles west of Lexington, down Highway 68. In fact, on your way to Harrodsburg, if anyone would want to go that way, you'll pass by Shaker Village, and the Shakers had a great deal of harm to do to the Restoration movement, to those especially. There were two that signed the last will and testament, the Barton W. Stone, that fell away into that movement. But while the school was in Harrodsburg, there was a school here in Lexington, the Transylvania College, and they started going on bad times. And in 1864, they invited the school at Harrodsburg to come up here, and out of that merger, in 1864, they were invited. In 1865, it was started. In 1865, it was called Kentucky University. Now, in that was also the College of the Bible. And if you think about the College of the Bible, which is Old Morrison, and is where where that was at that time, where McGarvey was, that McGarvey's name was synonymous with the College of the Bible. That J.W. McGarvey, it was here in Lexington, and right after he moved to Lexington, that he wrote his commentary on the book of Acts, which many of us have. I know that we'd have one in our library, and I recommend everyone having one in their library. But while McGarvey was president of the College of the Bible, that it was a very sound institution, and McGarvey did a lot fighting liberalism and the theological evolution that was coming really across the country. And while he was alive, the school stayed sound. But after his death, that's when problems started to come about. And this is why today we have the Lexington Theological Seminary. Let us go over here and talk about how it got to be the Lexington Theological Seminary.
Okay. You know, Paul, colleges are great, brotherhood colleges, but they've had a history of being sound for a while and then going into error. Did that happen here?
It sure did. In fact, this was one of the first. Any place where you'll find a college, you know, and I'm talking about brotherhood schools, especially where they're educating preachers, that area is usually saturated with a good number of churches. Churches would be started. Churches had easy access to preachers that would graduate from the school and students while they were in the school. And here in Lexington, Kentucky, in Fayette County, there's no different than any other place. In fact, you could take Lexington and you could spread out and look at each one of these counties, including Fayette County, Scott County, Bourbon County, going into Mason County, and you'll find literally hundreds of churches that at one time, most of them were preaching the truth. Now, some of them were started after the apostasy, but most of them were preaching the truth. That is, they believed in following the old paths and looking to God's Word. But while McGarvey was president, that's the way it was. But after his death, the university hired a president, R.H. Crossfield. He brought in 4 professors that thought completely different than what McGarvey thought. In fact, they started teaching the criticism of the biblical text. They started teaching theistic evolution. And in 1917, one of the students at the College of the Bible, his name was Battenfield, was sitting in the class. He took notes of what they were teaching, and he mailed out a letter to 300 preachers in the area. And that'd tell you how many churches were in the area when he mailed out to 300 preachers. And to give you an idea today, that in Fayette County alone, there is only 3 congregations, and only 2 of those are what we would consider sound. So that just tells you how vast the apostasy came about. Well, anyway, he mailed out this letter that they were teaching theistic evolution, that they were teaching that the God of the Jews, that they view Jehovah as a tribal God. See, now, when the brethren started complaining, well, they lied. They backed off, says, no, we're not teaching anything like that. And they just flat out didn't tell the truth. And Crossfield took up for the new teachers that he hired. Well, Hall Lorry Calhoun was the one who was director of the College of the Bible. Now, Calhoun was educated by McGarvey. McGarvey was the one that encouraged Calhoun to get his doctorate degree. And incidentally, I want to encourage, if you haven't read, you need to read The Christian Scholar. It's a biography of Hall Lorry Calhoun, and Brother Adrian Dorn is one of the writers on that, and especially his chapter on the firestorm in the bluegrass, which deals with exactly what we're talking about here. That in this here, Calhoun took the part of Battenfield. Well, when all this boils down, Calhoun had to resign here from the College of the Bible, and he went up to Bethany. Now, he wasn't there that long before he saw the same things being started at Bethany, and he had to resign there, and then ended up going to Freed Harding with Brother M.B. Hardiman. But because at that point, which was pivotal, and this is why today there's a Lexington Theological Seminary, is because of who they hired as the president to take the place of J.W. McGarvey, this Crossfield, who he brought in, to today, that all the labors, that all the money that brethren had put into pushing the College of the Bible, to lay the foundation, hopefully to educate preachers so that the old Jerusalem gospel will be preached throughout not only Kentucky, but the whole area and throughout the world. Well, all of that was for nothing as far as the College of the Bible and Lexington Seminary, because today they would not even believe the inspiration of the Bible. They would not believe in the virgin birth of Jesus.
Paul, you know, you mentioned they don't believe in the virgin birth here now. Don't believe in the inspiration of the Scripture. And this kind of thing, isn't it sad that a group would get to that point? And as McGarvey took on these thoughts and other thoughts coming from German theologians and so forth, did he save any of those writings for us or whatever?
All those writings he has saved. It's in book form. You still get them today. That refutes biblical criticism, refutes evolution. But the thing is, they grew beyond that. But you know, it's sad when you think about it too, that McGarvey, as great a man as he was, he compromised on some things. When we talk about the American Christian Missionary Society that was started by D.S. Burnett, and he was the one that was kind of the instigator, we could say, of that he was sick, and he made a vow to God that if he lived, he was going to do something to try to missionize the world. And so he dreamed of a missionary society, and he had Alexander Campbell appointed as the first president of it. Well, McGarvey was for the missionary society. Well, there's no authority for the missionary society. And then 10 years later, when the instrument was brought in at Midway, McGarvey fought strong and hard against that. And finally, it came to a point in time that he just gave up, and he stopped fighting that fight. And he would even go and preach where the instrument was. Later on in his life, I think he repented of that, at least from his attitude, that he was saying that he was wrong by going and preaching there and trying to compromise on that issue. Even though he didn't believe in the instrument, he did go and he preached in these different places which had the instrument. And when they brought the instrument in at Broadway, at the Broadway Christian Church, he left. But you know, the sad part is when he died, his family brought him back to the Broadway church building and used the instrument in his funeral. But because of that issue, that McGarvey certainly didn't stay firm on that, because of what Crossfield done in taking the College of the Bible away from the moorings of the Scriptures, not only did they fall away as far as Crossfield, the College of the Bible, and the students they were putting out, but it affected churches. It affected churches. In the county that I was born in, Wesley, Mason County, Kentucky, is only 60 miles northeast of here, that at one time there were 10 churches of Christ, but today there's just a mission work. I have about 25 people. Congregation there's about 15 to 20 years old at this time, and they're just struggling to reestablish where there was once a stronghold for the church. And that happens today, and I think it's happening in different places today where colleges are seeking money. Certainly colleges are something that they're hungry all the time, and they go to different places, and sometimes they'll compromise the truth. And that's wrong, because it's better not to have a college if truth is compromised, period. And if anything, it deceives people. If a young person's going away to college and they think they're going to get educated in the Bible, and they send them up here to a place like the College of the Bible was at the time of Battenfield. He came, he wanted to get a good education, but yet the teachers taught him theistic evolution.
That's sad, it really is. I think it might have been another congregation where McGarvey had his funeral preached, but the principle's the same, because I think that Broadway was under renovation at that time. Okay. But you know, when it comes to Alexander Campbell, wasn't he flip-flopping his position on the Missionary Society?
Well, Campbell in his paper, The Christian Baptist, taught about against societies. But yet in his older age, he went against exactly what he taught against. You know, he could more or less debate himself on that issue. But like you say, D.S. Burnett knew what he was doing when he had Campbell appointed the first president.
Yeah.
And I doubt if D.S. Burnett was appointed the first president if Campbell would have been behind it.
Yeah,
that's just
right.
my opinion on that.
Yeah, that's right. You know, the thing here is, and we want to warn all of you, that never follow a man, only to the extent that he follows Christ. Good men, even like Campbell, McGarvey, Stone, any of them, Scott, they'll let you down, they'll disappoint you. But Paul, if we'll stick with the Word of God, then we're not going to be disappointed.
That's for sure. Certainly this place, they haven't.
No.
They're gone away from it. In fact, I've known of some preachers that come here and get some education, and after they get their degree, they stop preaching.
That's sad.
They've lost their faith by the time this group gets done with them.
Yeah. And what's sad, even in our great brotherhood today, Paul, some of the colleges we got, they're destroying people. They're not helping them.
That's it. That's it. Incidentally, too, we need to bring in the, as far as the college goes, because out of Bacon College, when it went to Harrodsburg, and then came up here to Lexington and formed Kentucky University, out of that institution came Transylvania University, and it's a Disciples of Christ college today, this Lexington Theological Seminary, and also the University of Kentucky, which is just across the road here from the Lexington Theological Seminary. That a lot of brethren don't know that the University of Kentucky has its roots in Kentucky University, which is part of the Brotherhood.
We will flow, yet just a smile from my Savior I know.
We're now leaving Kentucky. We're going to go to West Virginia and Pennsylvania. Joining us in these two states, Terry Jones. We're in Bethany, West Virginia at the old church meeting house here where Alexander Campbell would have preached. Terry, is this the original building that was on this site?
Actually, Wesley, this is not the original building. However, it is the original foundation. The original building was built in 1831 and was there until 1852, at which time this particular structure was built on the same foundation.
And we want to warn our audience, don't confuse this building with Brush Run when we speak of the building where Alexander Campbell spoke or preached. This is a different building. How far would you say we are from the main campus?
I'd say we're about 3 or 4 blocks from the main campus.
Okay. Now, we see a couple of doors going in here. Why put 2 doors in a building?
Actually, this appeared to be a design of Alexander Campbell himself. It has 2 doors because at the time of this building being constructed, they still recognized a different entrance of both the male and the female members of the church. They are in the front of the building because Alexander Campbell felt that it was a hindrance to tardiness if people had to enter late through the front of the building for everyone to see.
At least you know who was running late, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Terry, since Alexander Campbell preached here, where did he live in relationship to the building? How far was it?
Well, the Campbell Mansion is only about a quarter to a half mile in this direction, so it's not very far away at all.
Unless it's raining or 10 degrees below zero or about that much snow, but they made it, didn't they?
Yes, they sure did.
And that's what we need, is good members of the body of Christ who are faithful. Terry, we're entering right now the meeting house here at Bethany, where Campbell preached here. And he would have preached here right up until the time of his death in 1866. The pews, of course, are homemade jobs, so to speak, as compared to ours today. But now, here's something, Terry, I've never seen, I don't believe, on a pew. What is that?
It's interesting, Wesley, that you find that this is a little platform that's found only here in all of the auditorium. Just this one seat has that accommodation. And it's interesting that Alexander Campbell's mother would sit here. She was somewhat hard of hearing, and she would lean forward and place her elbow on that and use a hearing device and put it to her ear so that she could better hear what her son was saying.
You know, sometimes we don't appreciate our blessings. We can go down and get a hearing test, get a hearing aid. They had to use a hearing horn. You know, a lot of people don't realize McGarvey could not hear very well, and he too had to use a hearing horn. And so that's one of the interesting facts about the building here. From the Bethany Meeting House, you can look across the street and see the Hibernia. It was here at the Hibernia that the Millennial Harbinger was printed for a while. Other buildings also in the area were used for the printing of the Christian papers put out by Alexander Campbell. This is Buffalo Creek, right behind Bethany Church, where Alexander Campbell preached. It was in this creek, right behind the old meeting house, that William McGarvey was baptized by W.K. Pendleton. McGarvey said he'd already made up his mind before he went there. He wanted to obey the gospel. He went forward, they walked down the bank, right into Buffalo Creek, and he was baptized into Christ.
And by and by, just across on the evergreen shore, sing the song of Moses and the Lamb.
We're in the cemetery here at Bethany. This cemetery, right across from the mansion, I'd say about 500 feet. Campbell marked this off, placed these beautiful stones around it, and called it God's Acre. It's here that you'll find the markers for Alexander Campbell. This is where he's buried. His father, Thomas, their wives, children, cousins, son-in-laws, presidents of the college, a lot of important people buried right here, people that Campbell loved dearly. I'm mindful of one story. Wycliffe is buried right over here. He drowned in Buffalo Creek. He drowned while Alexander Campbell was in Scotland. And he didn't find out about it until he got back to New York. When he got here, his wife Selina would often be missing from the mansion. Alexander Campbell would go looking for her. He knew where he'd find her. He'd find her right up here by his grave, crying, broken-hearted. Alexander Campbell would walk up behind her, hug her, and say, "Honey, he's not here." You see, there's a lot of memories here, a lot of heartache, people that truly loved one another. This was a family that prayed together, studied together, and cared for each other. But at other times, people would come to visit with Campbell, and he'd bring them up here. Terry, I believe you've got a story about Robert Owen along that line.
Robert Owen was a skeptic, he was an atheist, and he didn't believe in Christianity. And during his debate with Alexander Campbell, they were in God's Acre, and Alexander was giving him a tour of the Campbell farm. During that, we recall that Owen turned to Campbell and said, "You know, I have one advantage over the Christian in that I have no fear of death. If it were not for a few matters of business that I need to take care of, then I would have no problem dying at any moment." Mr. Campbell thought about that for a moment, and he thought about that, and he turned to Owen and he said, you have no fear of death, but do you have any hope in death? And to that, Mr. Owen said, no. And then Mr. Campbell replied as he looked over into the field and he saw a cow there lying in the shade. And he said, you're like that brute. You have no fear of death, but you have no hope in death either. And to that, Owen had no response.
You know, the whole concept of the Restoration Movement, Terry, was to call people back to the Bible so that they could have hope when they came to this point in life, and thus they were ushered out into eternity. Let's go look at some of the other graves that are here in markers. You're looking at the grave marker of W.K. Pendleton. W.K. Pendleton was the son-in-law of Alexander Campbell twice. First of all, he married Lavinia. Then, when she passed away of consumption, he married Clorinda. She passed away, and then he married and took a third wife. W.K. Pendleton was the second president of Bethany College. When Alexander Campbell was out of town, he would edit the Millennial Harbinger. He also became the editor of the Millennial Harbinger. I'm sorry to say that W.K. Pendleton was a strong supporter of the Missionary Society and saved it several times from going under. We're looking at the grave marker of Robert Richardson. Robert Richardson was a son-in-law to Alexander Campbell. Robert went to school to Walter Scott. Walter Scott also baptized him into Christ. Robert wrote one of the greatest books that can be found on the Restoration Movement, the Memoirs of Alexander Campbell. All right, we're looking at the markers here of the Barclays. The Barclays were the first missionaries to work under the Missionary Society. We're looking at the grave marker of A.M. Bakewell. This is the mother of Selina Campbell. When Margaret Brown got sick, she picked the wife that Alexander Campbell ought to have next, and that was Selina. And here Selina's mother is buried.
And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of...
Here we are at the Campbell Mansion, a beautiful old structure that's been preserved, once owned by John Brown. We'd have loved to have gone inside and done some taping and shown you where Alexander Campbell lived and died, but the college would not allow that. They've been gracious to us, and we're not about to violate their trust, but we'll give you some great, interesting facts about this structure and about the history and the things that occurred here at the mansion. Terry, we're at the Campbell Mansion here in Bethany. And I'm sure that when Alexander Campbell was sent over here by his father Thomas to return some books, that he never dreamed that he'd live here. The story is told that when Margaret saw him ride up, she made the comment, there's the man that I'm going to marry. And sure enough, she and Alexander were married right here in this home. Now, John Brown was afraid that Alexander would take his daughter and move off somewhere. But he had a plan. He thought he knew how he could keep them here. What was that plan?
Well, he decided that he would give them the house, and that he did. After they were married here, they were married in the parlor of this home, and so John Brown gave them, as a wedding present, this house. They originally moved in with the Browns and lived there for a time while the Browns built another home, and ultimately they moved out and left this place to them.
That's a pretty good wedding gift, a home, 300 acres. Now, did the plan work?
It sure did. Alexander lived here for the rest of his life, and so when he died in 1866, he was still living here.
Terry, you mentioned that John Brown gave this mansion to Alexander and Margaret. Do we know when it was built?
John Brown built this house in 1793.
Okay. Now, when you say you built the house, are you talking about the entire structure?
Actually, the original part that was built consists of just this end of the house. You'll notice that just on the other side of the door, there's a definite seam, and from there on was the original part that John built.
Okay. Now I see from the roof line another section here. Why did he add this on?
In about 1818, Alexander decided to form the Buffalo Seminary to train students to become preachers and those who would proclaim and promote the Restoration movement. And so he built this addition to the house to accommodate the school. The seminary was on the first floor of the house, and then upstairs he built rooms to accommodate the students and boarded them there.
Okay. Now as we think about that, where did the family live?
Well, he moved them to the basement, and so they lived in the basement of the house during that time.
Okay, when we think about living in the basement, I've been down there, it's pretty damp. Did that create problems for the family?
It appears that it did. As a matter of fact, it caused a great deal of illness in the family, and several family members died as a result of that.
Okay, so he paid a great price trying to educate young men to continue teaching the Restoration principles. Well, if he established a school here for that purpose, why in the world did he close it?
Well, after a period of time, Alexander began to see that many of the students that were here weren't actually going on and being preachers and proclaiming the Restoration cause. Rather, they were going on to be lawyers and doctors and going into other professions. He was becoming much more busy and a greater demand in speaking and traveling, and so he decided to close the seminary in about 1823.
I think he also stated he is tired of babysitting rich brats.
Yes.
I think he made that comment. Let's go up here and look at the rest of the mansion. Alexander Campbell was a mighty famous man. He rubbed shoulders with those who were famous, and oftentimes he and Margaret and he and Selena would have a lot of people drop in here. And no motels, no hotels, and they had a large family. Where in the world did he put all those people?
Well, eventually, in 1836, he built this wing of the house to accommodate all the visitors that would come by, and he named it Strangers' Hall.
You know, Terry, a lot of famous people stayed here. Henry Clay, James Garfield, who later became President of the United States of America. So if somebody wanted to come through here and visit with the Campbell family, they were always welcome. They always had a bed. Let's go up here and look at the study. Terry, as we walk toward the study here, it's about 150 feet from Strangers' Hall. It is said that Alexander Campbell would get up real early, sometimes as early as 4 o'clock in the morning. And he'd come up here and go to work, study hard, prepare materials for those who are setting type and so forth. This is where he spent a lot of time. Tell us a little bit about the study.
Well, it's got an interesting shape to it. He built it in a hexagon shape, which means it has 8 sides. It's built out of brick. It's not a very large study, but it appears that he didn't need a whole lot of room anyway.
Yeah. You know, we noticed at the house some additions. There was an addition made to this. And why did he add the addition?
On the back of the study, he built a little addition to accommodate a fireplace, which he used to provide heat while he was studying.
That's right. You can always use some heat in West Virginia in the winter times.
Yes.
I know one time he was asked how long he studied, and he made a comment to that effect. How long did he say he studied some days?
He said that he had gained the knowledge that he had because he had spent about 16 hours a day in studying.
So he spent a lot of time right here. We have our modern offices, but Alexander had this, and he came up here. Here's where he prepared for his debates. Here's where he edited the Christian Baptist, the Millennial Harbinger. And tell me about the furniture in there a little bit. You know about the furniture he had?
Well, he had very little furniture. All of the walls are lined with bookshelves. They're cases that are enclosed with glass, and the walls were lined with books. In the center of the study, there was a desk. It was a tall desk, and he normally stood while he did his studying and while he did his writing. Also, there was a chair, one chair, and attached to that chair was a round writing desk. And so he would often sit there and do some of his writing as well.
No doubt he loved that chair when he was sitting there and writing. After his death, what did Selena do with it?
It is recorded that Selena had taken the desk along with the writing table that was attached to it up to God's Acre, and she placed it beside the grave of Alexander Campbell. She stated that she left it there for 5 summers.
So a man could go up there, look at where Alexander Campbell was buried, and see something that represented a lot of his time. He did a lot of writing. How many volumes would you think, if we had it all put together, this man wrote during his lifetime?
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, some people say somewhere between 60 and 100. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it surely is. If you take just the things that were in print, he is said to have had about 60 volumes. But if you take all the other writing that he did, it's hard to tell how much it would make.
That's right. Terry, if Alexander Campbell was up here studying, and it's around 8 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd stop and he'd make his way back down toward the house, because they always had a Bible study at 8 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you and I would have been visiting here, we would have been expected to have been there, had a memory verse. We'd quote the verse, then Alexander Campbell would take some scripture, and then he'd explain the meaning of the scripture. What if you'd have been a young man here, though, and just wanting to date one of the girls?
It didn't matter if you were a young man or if you were a dignitary. Everyone who was in the house was always expected to be in Bible study.
Boy, isn't it great to see a family that did not want to forget God.
It appears that the Bible was always the center of this family, and what God's Word said was important to commit to memory.
That's great. Terry, we're at the back of the Campbell mansion. And we wanted to come back here so people could see how large this mansion really is. And through the years, they had to continue to add because of the size of the family and because of all the visitors. And right here, we have the schoolhouse. The children would get up, come out here, and they would receive a good quality education. You know, they were very fortunate to have men like Thomas and Alexander Campbell with their educational background.
Yeah, they were men that were known throughout the world for their intellect and for their great ability to think and to teach. And so they were able to provide a really good quality education for the children.
Right. Both of them taught in school at Ireland. They taught in the schools here in America. And we mentioned a moment ago how that Buffalo Seminary was here. And right over here we have the door to the basement. And actually there's a way from the inside to get down there, where the family moved when Buffalo Seminary was here in this home. And I know that had to be rough on the family.
Yeah, it certainly would have been difficult living conditions. Even at that time, I think it would have been difficult on them.
I think they knew what the word sacrifice meant.
Yeah, they did, but they also kept their priorities in mind, and they wanted to promote the cause of Christ.
Yeah, and we ought to have that same mindset.
Beyond the sunset.
It's 11.5 miles from the mansion to Brush Run. The road back in that day and time would have been extremely rough. It's not a good road now. Terry, we're at a very beautiful site here. We're at the Brush Run Meeting House, where it used to be, that is. And I'd say this is about halfway between Bethany and Washington, Pennsylvania. How far would it be from the mansion?
It's about 11.5 miles.
Now, we drove out here, and the road's not all that great now. Just think about what it must have been like back then trying to get here to worship. The way the congregation got started here, when Thomas Campbell and his wife and some others pulled out of the Presbyterian church, they started the Christian Association of Washington, a Bible study group. But nobody basically recognized them. He even went to the Presbyterians and tried to get them to do it, and they wouldn't do it. So they realized we have got to organize a church. And so they came here and organized the Brush Run congregation. They did not want to be associated with any denomination as such. they wanted to go back to the Bible. They had written, Thomas had, the Declaration and Address, which in essence was showing them how they ought to proceed in Bible study. You see, their attitude was, if we're not going to be Presbyterians, how are we going to approach Bible study? How are we going to approach things? And so really this became a philosophy. And the philosophy was, we do only what the Bible says. We do nothing more, nothing less. Now they did not realize where this was going to lead them. They did not realize at that time that they'd have to give up this doctrine and that doctrine. They'd have to change this or that. All they knew was they wanted to do what God Almighty asked them to do. And so then that was their mindset as they came here. Terry, on one occasion, after the congregation was formed, they came here to worship, and they'd already learned they ought to be partaking of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. Well, some of the members would not partake of the Lord's Supper. So Thomas wanted to know what the problem was. And what did they say the problem was?
They said that they did not feel like they were capable of doing that because they didn't feel that they'd ever really been baptized. They had obviously been sprinkled at an early age, but after reading their Bible and studying what the Bible had to say, they had come to the conclusion that they had not been immersed in water and therefore had not been baptized. So as a result of that, they did not feel that they could properly partake of the Lord's Supper and really be what they needed to be in the Lord's church until that took place.
And Thomas wasn't all that excited about baptizing because he thought, well, you've been baptized, quotation mark, they'd been sprinkled. But they said, now listen, you told us to go with the Bible. The Bible says it's a burial. That's what we want to do. And so he took them down here in Buffalo Creek and he baptized them. Terry, let's go down there and look at that site.
When all the God singers get home, when all...
Terry, we're in Buffalo Creek. This is believed to be the baptismal site for the Brush Run Church. Now, to show you kind of where we are, it's about 11 miles or so back to the mansion. We're about a mile from the Brush Run Church building. We mentioned a moment ago that some of the people at Brush Run were not pleased with being sprinkled. So they told Thomas Campbell, and Thomas brought him here. He didn't know what to do. He had never seen anybody buried in baptism. And so he got him to wade out in the creek. And then there was a tree that was falling across the creek, kind of like some of these are leaning over. And he crawled out on the tree and he pushed them under the water. And so he baptized them right here. Also in this creek, in the exact location, we do not know, Thomas and Alexander Campbell were later baptized. All of this came about, Terry, to a large degree because of the birth of little Jane. When Jane was born, what big issue came up in the family about baby Jane?
Well, up to that point in time, they always would sprinkle their children for baptism whenever they were born. And so Alexander had been thinking about baptism for some time, and so when their child was born, this became a really large issue. And so Alexander began to study the subject of baptism in great detail. And he looked at it from what the Bible had to say. He began to look at the Greek and what the original language had to say. And he arrived at the conclusion that in order for one to be scripturally baptized, that they were to be immersed in water.
When he decided that baptism was a burial, he told some of his other family members, to which Dorothea said, I've always thought, since studying my Bible, that it was a burial. And so then we had Dorothea, we had Thomas and Jane, we had Alexander and Martha, and another couple, Terry, that were willing to be baptized, but they had nobody to baptize them. So they got Matthias Luce, a Baptist preacher, to come and baptize them. But to start with, as they talked to Mr. Luce, he didn't want to do it. Why didn't he want to baptize them?
Well, certainly what they were making request of him was far different from that which he had ever done or practiced in the Baptist church. One of the great hindrances that he had was that he did not feel comfortable about baptizing someone without them first giving a religious experience or relating a religious experience as his particular church had always required. And so he was concerned that if he would perform these baptisms without that religious experience being given, then he would get in trouble with his own church.
Yeah, he said, this is not in harmony with Baptist doctrine. And Alexander Campbell said, but it's in harmony with what they did in the Bible. And so he convinced Mr. Luce to come and baptize him, but Mr. Luce said, I want to bring a witness. So they brought a witness. And Terry, when they gathered at Buffalo Creek that day, it was a Wednesday, for that baptismal service, about how long did it take?
Well, it appears that it took about all day. Interestingly enough, there were a great crowd of people that gathered who had heard that this was going to take place, and so they gathered because they wanted to be witness to the events. And before that baptism took place, the records tell us that both Alexander and Thomas spoke on that occasion, and they did so for a great period of time. As a matter of fact, it appears that they spoke for about 7 hours that day prior to the baptisms taking place.
Can you imagine standing around Buffalo Creek here and listening to two men speak for about 7 hours? Now here's what's great about these men. We're not trying to exalt them. We're not trying to exalt their families. But here's what Alexander Campbell said. He said, a true disciple of Christ will follow the truth wherever it leads him. When he came to realize that sprinkling was not authorized by the Word of God, he was willing to submit to what the Bible said. So he and his family came here, and they were baptized because God said it's a burial. You and I ought to have the attitude, if God says the thing is a certain way, that settles it. And so then we appreciate their great attitude, Terry, that if God says it, that's what I want to do.
That's exactly right.
Let's go back to Bethany now and take a better look at the town and the college established by Alexander Campbell. But this place wasn't always known as Bethany. How did it get its name?
Actually, it was originally called Buffalo, Virginia. Alexander Campbell had a desire to start a post office here and become the postmaster. But there were two other communities that were already existing by the name of Buffalo. And so he petitioned the State House in Charlestown, Virginia, to have the name changed to Bethany. And so he made that petition and it was granted, and from that time forward it was known as Bethany, Virginia.
And he became the postmaster.
And then he became the postmaster.
Well, did he take advantage of that job?
He certainly did. As a postmaster at that time, he was able to receive free postage for anything that he wanted to mail. And so, being the editor of the Millennial Harbinger as well as the Christian Baptist, he was able to mail those publications free of charge, and so it was a great benefit to him.
And men like John T. Johnson, John Raccoon Smith, they learned the truth by reading publications like that. And Terry, we need to be mindful of the value of the printed page. On December 10th, 1857, Alexander Campbell was down at his study when all of a sudden he noticed smoke rising from this area where the old college used to be, a wooden structure. It burned up. Now behind us, a beautiful structure. Terry, when was it erected?
It was erected in 1858. Actually, when the old structure burned, Alexander Campbell, although he was fairly old, he was around 70 years old at the time, he immediately set out to raise funds to build a new building. And so he went on an extended tour trying to raise money so that this building could be built.
And we see many other beautiful buildings that have been built around what we call Old Main. This is the home of W.K. Pendleton, twice the son-in-law of Alexander Campbell, second president of the college here at Bethany. The house is on campus and now serves as the home of the president of the college. At Monticello, Kentucky, you can find the old home of John Raccoon Smith when he lived at Horse Hollow. You know, we've seen a lot of mansions on our tour, but not everybody that preached lived in a mansion, as this home clearly illustrates, built before 1814. Many of these people were humble, they were poor, but they had one thing you and I both need, a love for God and a love for the Bible. And they were seeking to do only that which God Almighty authorized, and we're indebted to them for it.
My heart restores its borrowed.
We'll stop off briefly to see the home of Rice Haggard. We'll be joined there by Lawrence Williamson as he tells us the history of Rice Haggard and that home.
I'm Lawrence Williamson. I'm from Clay County, Tennessee, and we're here across the state line in Kentucky, in Cumberland County, Tennessee, in the home of Rice Haggard. We're going to tell you something about the home and something about Rice Haggard in the next few minutes. This home was originally located on Kettle Creek, some 12 miles from here. And it was disassembled piece by piece, the logs and the rocks, and reassembled at this location in Burkesville, Kentucky, by Randolph Smith, which was interested in historical things and preserved the house. So we're indebted to him for doing that. I believe he did that in 1973. This house, composed of 4 rooms, is typical of that particular era. We don't know when the house was built. We do know that Rice Haggard inhabited or lived in this house probably only about 1 year. In 1818, he bought this house from William Davis, so he did not build the house. It has 4 rooms, and we were in one of the rooms here, probably one of the bedrooms that we're in at this particular time. And then above us here is another room that has living quarters at that time. And then across the dog trot here, the hall, there's 2 other rooms. The kitchen is off to the left of that, and then there is a room upstairs. The way that they got upstairs was that they have a ladder on the wall. They climb up there to the bedrooms and have those quarters up there. Rice Haggard came to this particular area about 1812 and purchased property and was in this area with his brother prior to living in the house. So this house only served him in the ministry as he was a circuit rider for a short period of time. We're going to tell you more about Rice Haggard and his work in the Restoration Movement in just a moment. We're now here in the breezeway of the Rice Haggard home. This was a dog trot in which was open when Rice Haggard lived here. Now it's been enclosed for the protection of the house. And there is a walkway connecting the 2 upper rooms here that has been installed for convenience since Rice Haggard lived in this home. Now we're walking into probably what might be the living room of Rice Haggard days, and off to our left there is a kitchen that was built onto the cabin, and to my right there is that ladder that goes up to the upper rooms. Rice Haggard, as I previously said, didn't spend much time in this home, but it was his home while he lived in Cumberland County. Rice Haggard was born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1769 and was a Methodist. In fact, he became a Methodist when he was 18. By the time he was 22 years old, he was ordained as a Methodist minister. And then, of course, Rice Haggard and James O'Calley left the Methodist Church when he was about 25 years old and started the Republican Methodist Church over some dispute about they not having, that is, preachers not having enough influence on where they would go and spend their time. So then, as they left the Methodist Church and formed the Republican Methodist Church in Virginia, they saw there's no authority for the Republican Methodist Church. So Rice Haggard was asked to give the name in which the followers would wear. And he says the Bible is a sufficient guide for us, and we ought, like they in the Bible, be called simply Christians. And of course, that was passed. And then from that time, he had influence in the Restoration movement through his brother David that lived in this area around 1800 first, long before Rice Haggard came here. And it was David that, through losing some of his foxhounds, went in and finding them, came in contact with John Mulkey, which is one of the leaders in the Restoration movement, and we will talk about John in another section. But then he gave John the invitation to go to the Cane Ridge meeting in 1801, and John Mulkey did. That ties then the Haggards in the Virginia area with the Mulkeys in the Kentucky area. And when Rice Haggard then in 1804 was up at the meetings in Cane Ridge, he's the one that gave Barton W. Stone the designation again of what their followers would wear after they had left the Presbyterian Church and formed the Springfield Presbyter and dissolved it. And it was at that time that he, Rice Haggard, made his speech concerning that they ought to be called Christians, and they were. So it seems to me that this is significant, that Rice Haggard gave the designation for the followers of Christ in Virginia. His brother contacted John Mulkey and gave him the first introduction to the restoration of New Testament Christianity here in Kentucky. And then he went, that is Rice Haggard, went on to Cane Ridge to give the followers there the designation of Christians. We're still here in the Rice Haggard home, touring it, as well as we're giving some information on Rice Haggard. Rice Haggard was married to Nancy Grimes somewhere around 1806 or 1808 in Norfolk, Virginia. And as I had previously said, moved to this area in Cumberland County, Kentucky in 1812, and which is not sure where they lived for that period of time, but they moved into this home, as we have already said, in 1818. To that union of Nancy and Rice came 6 children, 2 sons, in which one became a lawyer and the other one was a doctor. And Nancy lived until 1862 and is buried with her son here in this county, in Cumberland County. Now Rice died suddenly when he was only 50 years old. He was on a tour or a campaign in Champaign, Ohio. In that area, his wife had inherited some land from her father. And no one knows where Rice Haggard is buried. Probably because of that. That is, that they don't know where he's buried, and because that Rice Haggard wrote his significant pamphlet in the Restoration movement called the Address to the Different Religious Societies on the Import of the Sacred Name Christian. He wrote that anonymously. And because that pamphlet or tract was lost sometimes from 1815 and discovered again in 1953, Rice Haggard unfortunately has not gotten the significance or import that he needs in recognition in the Restoration movement. I want to tell you just a little bit about that particular pamphlet. It was first published in 1804. You can remember that because that was the same year that we had the great revival meetings at Cane Ridge with Barton W. Stone. We're not sure where he wrote it. Many think he wrote it in Norfolk, Virginia, but we're not sure about that. But it appears again in 1808, published by Elias Smith, which was a preacher in the Restoration up in Vermont area, in his particular religious paper. Then it appears again published in Dayton, Ohio in 1815. And so then we have this pamphlet that describes the evils of sectarianism, the importance of everybody wearing the name Christian. And Rice Haggard then, in his contribution to the Restoration movement, took people back to what are we going to call ourselves, and he says we're going to simply be Christians. Now, while I've just already made mention that Rice Haggard is not in the historical books as being a significant character in the Restoration movement because of the factors that I probably just said to you, that is that he died of early age of 50, wrote that tract anonymously when he was just 35 years old, and because there's no grave marker or any other kind of memorial to Rice Haggard, then he takes somewhat of a back seat in the Restoration movement. But all that are heirs of the Restoration that believe that we can be Christians and Christian only should remember Rice Haggard, for he's the one that said to James O'Kelly and to Barton W. Stone, we ought to be Christians and simply Christians.
Hide me when the storm is raging, or life's...
Our tour continues as we leave Rice Haggard's home and we go to Salina, Tennessee, where we're joined by Ken Miller as he tells us about the Rock Springs Church of Christ, which dates all the way back to Barton W. Stone.
Hello, my name is Ken Miller, and I have the privilege of preaching for the Rock Springs Church of Christ. Immediately over my right shoulder, about a quarter of a mile in some woods behind this building, is a stream that comes out from a small cleft of rocks. It is from this small stream that the Rock Springs Church of Christ takes its name. In the late 1700s, a group of Christians meeting together in an area known as Pea Ridge, which is located about 8 miles north of Salina, Tennessee, began to meet together in homes of individuals who were prevalent in the community of that day and time. In about 1805, the first building was constructed on this particular site, and it was at that time that those group of individuals became known as the Church of Christ. Prior to that, they had identified themselves simply as the Christian Church, but not the Christian Church that we think of in the denominational sense of our day and time. It was from this group of Christians that the church had its beginning, and as they began to meet here, they have had an illustrious history throughout this particular region. There has been many great preachers that have come and gone through the years who have stood in the pulpit. The old building that was originally here was a log, and several years ago it burned, and this second structure was built, and then later on that second structure was brought and bricked. The old building was heated by wood stoves, and at night when they would have meetings, they would have old lanterns, coal oil lanterns around the outside walls. And many times I have heard stories of how that men and women would stand outside of the building, and this yard area would be full of people who were desirous of hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ. One thing that is significant about the Rock Springs Church in relationship to the Restoration movement is its date. In 1805, this congregation of Christians became identified as the Church of Christ. The reason that is so significant is because it was not until 1807 that Thomas Campbell came to the United States, and then 2 years later his son Alexander came in 1809. Now it would be very hard for a man such as Campbell to have started a church, the Church of Christ, 2 years or 4 years prior to his coming to this country. And then, of course, we know that it was not until about 1827 that he actually broke away from the Baptist and Presbyterian associations and other groups of that nature and time. The Rock Springs Church has had a very illustrious history with many individuals who have stood in this pulpit over the past few years. And I am often in awe of having the opportunity to stand in this same pulpit in which men and women for almost 200 years now have heard the preaching of the gospel. And I hope that the church today can go on and continue on as the Lord said it was going to throughout all of time until He comes to take us back home once again.
Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake.
We now leave the Rock Springs Church and we head toward Tompkinsville so that we can see the old Mulkey Meeting House. Again, we'll be joined by Lawrence Williamson as he tells us of the history of this great structure.
We're here today at the old Mulkey Meeting House. This was the Mill Creek Baptist Church, established in the late 1700s, about 100 yards or two from here, by Philip Mulkey. And this building here was built in 1804. You might notice the corners of the building here, this area is jutted out. It's built in the form of a cross. On the other side, likewise, it's jutted out. And so that represents, of course, the cross of Jesus Christ. And then on the building, if you'll count the corners, on each corner in the building, you come up with 12 corners, which is representative of the 12 apostles. Of course, you can see the south door of the building right here. It has 3 doors. There's a south door and a west door and an east door. And those 3 doors symbolizes the Godhead. And so as they built the building to worship in 1804, they were cognizant of the fact that they wanted to build a building that represented some spiritual significance. And so they did that in the form of the cross, and in the form of the Trinity, the Godhead with the doors. And so the Mulkey Meeting House, in which John Mulkey left the Baptist Church and helped started restoring New Testament Christianity, started here at this particular site, this particular building. The old building, as you can see, is well preserved and is a beautiful state shrine. And those that may have opportunity to come here, we are in the location of Tompkinsville, Kentucky, about a mile outside of Tompkinsville, Kentucky. The story of John Mulkey does not start here at the old Mulkey Meeting House, nor in the Tompkinsville area here in South Kentucky, but it starts with his grandfather, Philip Mulkey, up in North Carolina, that he was a Baptist preacher. And he likewise had a son named Jonathan Mulkey that became a Baptist preacher. And then from Jonathan, there came John Mulkey, which was his son. So here we have 3 generations of Baptist preachers. And John Mulkey had a brother that helped him out in the ministry named Philip. And they came from North Carolina into East Tennessee. And no one knows exactly how they got from East Tennessee down to here in southern Kentucky. But they came in the late 1700s. As we pointed out before, back behind this building, they established the Mill Creek Baptist Church. But they were influenced, that is John, prior to the division taking place here, by David Haggard, that lived at that time over around now Burkesville, which is about 10 miles from here. And he lost his hunting dogs, and he was en route to find them when he and John Mulkey came across one another. So when he invited John Mulkey to go to the Cane Ridge meeting of 1801, John Mulkey was introduced to restoring New Testament Christianity. And we believe that he heard about the last will and testament of the Springfield Presbytery. And so then, influenced by that, he came back to here and started studying his Bible and led to a restoration. Now, if you'll come with me, we'll go inside the building, we'll finish the story. In 1809, John Mulkey was preaching a sermon in the house of William Simons down on the river, Cumberland River at Turkey Neck Bend. And in that lesson, he was preaching on John 10 and making a strong argument for predestination. But as he made that argument, he convinced himself that the doctrine was false. And then he began to preach and teach the universal call of all mankind. As he came back to the old Mulkey meeting house, he made the statements to the church that Christ should be the only creed and the Bible should be our only rule book. And he also made the point that we should give up the doctrine of teaching that some people are elected and saved from all eternity and some are damned from all eternity. For why are we out here in the wilderness of Kentucky trying to convince people to believe in Jesus Christ? And so that stirred the church tremendously. And then there was an elder named John Wood that led the opposition to oppose John Mulkey because they thought he was teaching heresy contrary to Baptist doctrine and the association that they was in. And so then followed 3 meetings in which that they go through trials of trying to determine if he's preaching the truth or is he a heretic. The year is 1909, in which there was a trouble brewing in the Mill Creek Baptist Church, in which that there were 3 trials to determine if John Mulkey was a heretic or not. The first one was in August, the second Saturday, in which they met here and determined if he was. It seemed to be the evidence supported that he was, and so they didn't know what to do, so they called for help. And they said, we'll have a next meeting in October, the second Saturday, and we'll call in 5 other Baptist congregations to help us resolve the problem. So during that second meeting, they had the debate and questions and answers, and then at the end of that meeting, they said, all that think that John Mulkey should be justified, raise your hand. And the majority raised their hand. So they saw that they could not try him for heresy, and so they said, then we'll meet again November the 18th. It's upon that date in the 3rd meeting, in November the 18th, that he probably, John Mulkey, probably had some exhortations, maybe from this very pulpit, in which I'm standing behind now. And then notice how long this is. And to my left, there's a door, and directly in front of me, there's another door. And then this is the west door, the infamous door that's remembered in which he and his followers walk out. But during that 3rd meeting, he proposes that they just forget about the matter and that they work together and study the Scriptures to see if they cannot resolve the matter. But Elder John Wood says, not unless you return into the doctrine that you formerly believed and taught. And so upon that, Mulkey said that, well, we need to have a resolution and vote and see who is for departing and who is for staying. When John Mulkey got up from wherever he was in the building, things must have been tense in the building because of the stress of the moment. Yet as we study about this particular meeting, they tell us that things were very peaceful and people were really interested in discerning the truth. And so as he walks along the long pulpit, he makes the statement, all those that believe as I believe, follow me out the west door. As John Mulkey made his way out the west door and bent his head because of the short door and started down the steps, little did he know that he would be a man with the majority. As he stepped out in the cold gray air of that November day, snow had been falling upon the ground. And as he waited there in the clump of trees and looked back, it was Hannah Pendleton that first came out the door behind him in support of him. That was the sister to Daniel Boone. And so then as they waited, more came out the door and off their seats to stand with them. And when it was all done, they had the majority, 150 about, of the 200 members. The other people went out the east door and congregated on the other side of the building. And within 30 minutes or so, those people had disappeared in their horses and buggies over the hill. John Mulkey, the very next Saturday, met together with those people that had followed him out the west door and established a congregation with the Bible and the Bible only as their creed book. John Mulkey preached the gospel in this area in South Kentucky and northern Tennessee until 1844, when he departed this world. Now here, about 10 miles from here in Vernon Community. He and his wife Elizabeth are buried in graves there that are marked. And he preached some 10,000 sermons in this particular area and converted that many people to Jesus Christ. It's told on one occasion that while he was in Salina for a 5-day meeting, he immersed 105 people. Truly, John Mulkey was one of the great men of courage to stand for what he thought was the truth in the beginning of the Restoration movement here in southern Kentucky and northern Tennessee. We are then therefore grateful for the strides that he'd made in rejecting Calvinism, following the Bible only, and having the courage to do what he thought is right. And so because of him, many people then, I'm sure, have known the truth of the gospel. And as we look back to the old Mulkey Meeting House, we want to remember John Mulkey and the work that he did in the Restoration movement. There's one last thing that I might remind you of. There is a book called The Old Mulkey Meeting House by Mullen. It's written by Mullen. It may be that you can find that book in some bookstore. And we commend that book to you to find more on the Restoration movement and John Mulkey.
Our tour continues now as we leave the old Mulkey Meeting House. We drive to Nashville, Tennessee, to the Disciples of Christ Historical Society. If you're in the Nashville area, this is a good place to stop. There are many archives, and I believe that you'll enjoy it much. When you pull up in front of the building, you'll see a stone monument. Here, represented on the stone, figures of what some call the Big Four in the Restoration movement: Thomas Campbell, Alexander Campbell, Barton W. Stone, Walter Scott. Let us go in now and look at some of the archives on the inside. When one gets inside the Historical Society, he'll see many photographs and paintings of those who were involved in the Restoration movement. You'll see scenes of what it used to be like when people chose to obey the gospel of Christ and were baptized into his precious body. There are communion cups that were employed by Thomas Alexander Campbell and even some at Cane Ridge. You'll see old examples of the Millennial Harbinger printed by Alexander Campbell from 1830 to 1870. Are you looking for data? Are you looking for information on some of the men of the Restoration movement? Good chance if you come right here, you'll find it.
Where the soul of man never dies, and I will spend eternity where the...
We want to thank you so much for being with us during this study and tour of the Restoration movement. We hope that you've enjoyed it. Now, we want you to also understand we only gave you just a little bit of information about this great movement. We'd like to encourage you to study more. We, at the end of the tape, will give you a list of books like this one right here, The Memoirs of Alexander Campbell by Robert Richardson, so that you can learn more about the Restoration movement. Also, at the end of the tape, you'll find sites and locations so that if you desire to go there, you can. I believe that you'll enjoy much a continuation of this great study. As we said at the beginning of the program, we love the men and women of the Restoration movement, but they're not our standard. The Bible is the standard. As a matter of fact, one of the men in the movement that I love much, Barton W. Stone, said this, that unity was his polar star. Unity can never be our polar star. You see, obeying God must be our polar star. And then unity is a byproduct thereof. We have too many people in our great brotherhood today that push unity above all things. Well, unity's great, but obeying God is where you and I must wind up. And so then we can see these men had some great thoughts. But if the thought was out of harmony with God's Word, then we must go with God's Word and not with these men. We are indebted to the men and women, though, of the Restoration movement who blazed the way out of religious darkness and error to get back to the New Testament and doing what God Almighty would have them do. As we take the program off, we want to show you one more beautiful site, known as the Rock House. Here the Indians used to fish. Here the Indians used to hunt around the rock. This is near Crillsboro, Kentucky, on the great and beautiful Cumberland River. The Indians would often bury their dead on top of this great rock. You know, as we think about looking at what took place here, the pioneers would come and they'd gather under the rock. Some preacher would get up and preach, and many a person no doubt obeyed the gospel of Christ right here. Well, if they heard the word of God and they wanted to obey, where were they going to be baptized? Well, look at the beautiful Cumberland River here. You can see the baptistry was right there. And so we see that disciples in days gone by and those seeking truth met in some very unusual places. We're indebted to God here in America for all the many blessings we have. But let's not forget this. Just like the men and women of old, the most important thing that we can do is seek the truth above all things. Alexander Campbell said this, "A true disciple will follow truth wherever it leads him." And boy, that is a great statement. So then, we commend you to God and to that great truth, and continue to study the great Restoration movement so that you can appreciate those who've gone before.
I'm kind of homesick for a country to which I've never been before. No sad goodbyes will there be spoken, for time won't matter anymore. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. I'm looking now across the river, where my faith will end in sight. There's just a few more days to labor, then I will take my heavenly flight. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. Beulah land, I'm longing for you, and someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. I'm looking now across the river, where my faith will end in sight. There's just a few more days to labor, And someday on thee I'll stand, where my home shall be eternal. Beulah land, sweet Beulah land. What a song of delight in that city so bright, will be wafted 'neath heaven's fair dome. How the ransomed will raise happy songs in his praise, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, where never a sorrow or heartaches will come. There'll be no place like heaven, my home, when all of God's singers get home. As we sing here on earth songs of sadness or mirth, 'tis a foretaste of rapture to come. But our joy can't compare with the glory up there, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, where never a sorrow or heartaches will come. There'll be no place like heaven, my home, when all of God's singers get home. Having overcome sin, hallelujah, amen, will be heard in that land o'er the foam. Every heart will be light, and each face will be bright, when all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home, where never a sorrow or heartaches will come. There'll be no place like heaven, my home, when all of God's singers get home. No tears in heaven, no sorrows given, all will be glory in that land. There'll be no sadness, all will be gladness, when we shall join that happy band.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, sorrow and pain will all have flown.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, no tears in heaven will be known. Glory is waiting up yonder, where we shall spend an endless day. There with our Savior we'll be forever, where no more sorrow can dismay.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, sorrow and pain will all have flown.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, no tears in heaven will be known. Some morning yonder we'll cease to ponder o'er things this life has brought to view. All will be clearer, loved ones be dearer, in heaven where all will be made new.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, sorrow and pain will all have flown.
And there'll be
no tears in heaven, there's no tears up there, no tears in heaven will be known. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair, when the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. On that bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of his resurrection share, when his chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there.
This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.